Hey guys, welcome to BP the Bible Perspective, part 2 of Mr. Charlie, Apostle to White American Evangelicals. Now, before we get into it, please like and share this video and subscribe to BP the Bible Perspective. And as always, if you have a thought, a comment, add it to the comment section below. All comments are welcome. Now, this is part 2 of a unpacking of Charlie Kirk. And Charlie Kirk has emerged as I'm labeling him the apostle to white America. And in this segment, I'm even narrowing it down to the apostle to the white evangelical. And the reason why I'm doing this is because the segment in which I'm unpacking took place in a Calvary Chapel church. And that is so disappointing to me because this Calvary Chapel Church I'm very familiar with Calvary Chapel churches, but I'm not surprised. And I went into this last time, so I'll briefly just recap this. The Calvary Chapel Church where I'm unpacking Charlie Kirk's, I'm going to say lies. I'll get back to that in a moment. But Jack Hibbs, which is a Calvary Chapel Chino Hills, certainly is presenting himself as a white evangelical, not even a Bible-believing evangelical, not even a Bible-believing Christian. He has aligned himself with the likes of Charlie Kirk. Now, Charlie Kirk, as I said, is the apostle to white America, and if he's the apostle to white America, Trump is the savior of white America. Now, how did Trump emerge? In other words, when you think about the evangelical movement, and the word evangelical represents the strict Bible adherence. In other words, they're Bible-believing, Bible adherence. In other words, out of anybody else, when you think about all the denominations in Christianity, the evangelicals will tell you that they are strict Bible-believing Christians, and therefore they then earn the most severe judgment against them, because when Trump can emerge and guide them into a path that violates every value that they stand for. So the question becomes, why or how could Trump guide those who claim to be, the most strictest Bible-believing people, right? How does he emerge as their savior? And then the likes of Charlie Kirk then becomes their apostle. Now, the word apostle means to be sent. And Charlie Kirk is crisscrossing the nation, spreading really the theology of white nationalism. You can also even say white Christian nationalism. Charlie Kirk himself, as we said before, is the founder of and executive director of Turning Point USA. And here's the interesting thing. He's only in his late 20s, which tells us so much for this, racism is over in America, right? He's perpetuating the same kind of white point of view, white world point of view that you hear in the 60s. Do you realize that the United States government said that Martin Luther King was the most dangerous man in America? Now I want you to think about that for a moment. Martin Luther King, this is what they said, that he was the most dangerous man in America. Now they said that despite the fact that literally at the time of this statement, at the time of it, and by the way, this was right after the I Have a Dream speech. Tens of thousands of blacks have been terrorized, brutalized, and lynched. Okay? And they said Martin Luther King was the most dangerous man in America. Now, by the way, Martin Luther King has never lynched anybody, never shot anybody, never killed anybody, never swore racial epithet at anyone. But yet he's the most dangerous man. Now, why is that mentality? It's the same mentality they said doing Jim Crow, right? In other words, racism. What racism? It is the same mentality that they even said doing slavery. And which we're going to get to in a moment, because he quotes Thomas Jefferson, who owned 600 slaves. We'll get to him later. So Kirk has emerged as this white point of view, and that's being nice. He's the apostle to white America. And then, of course, then you have the Christian church. Now, every Christian denomination wrestled with slavery and segregation to their shame. And they all eventually reconciled, even repenting. What is most interesting is that the 1965 Civil Rights Bill ended legal racism. It wouldn't be for another 30 years that most of the denominations repented of their racism, if you want to call it that. What didn't change is the heart and the mentality. And thus we have 3 generations later, the people like Jack Hibbs in his church who hosted, he paid Charlie Kirk to come, right? And to preach a white message, to preach a white nationalist message. This was hosted, this was paid for, but hosted in this man's church. He's a mega church pastor. And as I said, he is part of what's called the Calvary Chapel movement, which is a non-denominational, in the charismatic family, but not all Calvary Chapels are alike. They are autonomous, started by the late Chuck Smith. And as I said before, what should be of note about the Calvary Chapels is that they have some 1,400 plus fellowships today. And the vast majority of them, on purpose, are in white neighborhoods, white towns, white communities. That's on purpose, by the way. Now, what you find here with Jack Hibbs is that he now ascribes to this white America. Now, he won't say these words, but think about it. Here is Jack Hibbs, a verse-by-verse Bible teaching pastor, hosting one of the most racist guys, Charlie Kirk. In other words, Jack Hibbs should be able to discern the message behind Charlie Kirk, but instead he aligns himself with the message of Charlie Kirk. And this is the thing here. So we go back to, let's answer the question before we move on. How is it that even those who preached against slavery, and Thomas Jefferson did, but we'll get to him later, how is it that in the church, those who claim that they are against racism, but yet align with people like Charlie Kirk? How does Jack Hibbs align with Charlie Kirk? Because he thinks like him. Because in his congregation, they think like him. And this is 3 generations after the passage of the 1965 Civil Rights Bill. But yet, they still cling to the notion of a white Christian America. And Donald Trump has become the savior of that. The hope that, the hope that, I'm going to say the great white hope that he would lead them back to this white Christian America. And Charlie Kirk is the apostle of that message. Okay, so I'm going to get back into it and unpack. Now, I'm going to play the message again. I'm going to play this. I'm going to play the video in its entirety again, and then I'll pick up where we left off. Here we go. Oops, wrong thing here. Where's my video at? Here we go.
She is on a pathological campaign to make sure your kids hate America. And so Nicole Hannah Jones, red hair, see her on TV, always talking about how awful white people are. and how awful our country is. She's a bitter racist. I actually call her racist because I think racism is hatred of anyone of any skin color at any time. I think it is sinful and hateful and awful, and it is a sin. That's simple. Okay.
Yeah.
So she says that our country was founded in 1619, the first year that slaves came to our country. This is not correct. It's not. So if you actually look at the founding of our country, 1776, this great leap forward, 2,000 years forward, derived, of course, from the teachings of Athens and the combination of Jerusalem, Aristotle, Plato, Descartes, Aquinas, Locke, all the best practices put into one, authored by who? Thomas Jefferson, very important, I'll get back to him in a second, who says, laws of nature and nature's God. What happens in 1777? First state ever to abolish slavery, Vermont, says that's it, we're done. Why? We're inspired by this document. They abolished slavery. We were inspired on the abolition of slavery. When they were putting together the Constitution, it was never a conversation, ever. Don't let the people, the New York Times or Hannah Jones tell you any different. It was never a question of whether or not we would have slavery. It was how we were going to get rid of this sinful practice. It was around for thousands of years. It was around before Christ. It was around after Christ. It is a sin. So our country was founded. Constitutional Convention, 1787. In 1787, George Washington says no new slaves at all, no slavery in the Northwest Territories. So anything forward, no slavery at all. They won't teach your kids that. Then, moving forward, in the Constitution, you can read it yourself, 20-year moratorium on the slave trade. You got 20 years, southern states, then it is coming to an end. Reappears Thomas Jefferson, who actually introduced the bill in the early 1790s in the Virginia House of Commons, who said that slavery was an awful practice. I want to get rid of it. Now, mind you, it was probably one of the most perplexing pieces of hypocrisy in history because he himself was a slave owner, but he still was arguing for a moral good societally, failed in the Virginia House eventually. Eventually, of course, it succeeded. We saw in the 1790s, almost every single northern state abolished slavery. By the time 1807 happened, Thomas Jefferson had his time to shine. Thomas Jefferson, third president of the United States of our country. That 20 years, tick, 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 in the Constitution, right? They did that as a bargain with the southern states. Thomas Jefferson, on the first day, he was legally able to abolish the incoming of any new slaves into the United States of America 20 years into our founding. That is something we should be proud of. We were founded from the moment that we started that said that this was wrong and this is evil. Now, mind you, it wasn't a perfect history. It went through decades of ups and downs, and we went through a bloody civil war. But show me another country that sacrificed so much, brother against brother and father against son, to accomplish something that what? The churches were screaming in the pews and the pulpits, and Thaddeus Stevens was inspired by a pastor to go to Congress and say, slavery is anti-American. Our founders said it. Thaddeus Stevens said it. We fought this bitter civil war, and Abraham Lincoln kept the republic together on this unionist idea that I think America's best day can be ahead of us, where all men are equal and free. Fast forward all the way to Frederick Douglass, where he says that we need to abolish slavery. Why? Because I'm so inspired by the Declaration of Independence. He was an abolitionist who understood it. Go all the way fast forward to the great Martin Luther King Jr., who himself lived a very, let's say, he had questionable moral decisions, but he was arguing for what? A moral good. Why do I keep on saying this? Because people can act sinfully personally, but argue for something righteously publicly, and they should be remembered for what they did good publicly, not for what they did less than desirably privately. It's a very important thing. People say, well, we got to get rid of all these people, but dare you forget what they sacrificed for our country. And Martin Luther King said in that beautiful speech, I come here to cash in the check of the promissory note of the Declaration of Independence. Yes. He didn't say that this document was racist. He didn't say we got to shred it from its roots. He says, this document says all men are created equal. And I'm telling you, Congress, to pass the Civil Rights Act. From that moment that we started this country to the Civil Rights Act of the 1960s, it was a constant theme, a march and a progression to be better. And isn't that what we do every single day in our own life, to try to be better today than we were yesterday? We cannot forget our history. We should be proud of it. No other country has pursued a moral good like the United States of America. Be proud of this country.
All right. So I want to go back, like I say, and just unpack that 4-minute segment full of lies. However, let me say this, that not only is it full of lies, but we also have to understand that there are a lot of half-truths. And so there's no contradiction here, because basically, if you say, Charlie Kirk arguing that America, how great America was, and that America did everything they could to end slavery, would be like Egypt right? Be like Egypt, proclaiming how good they were in in enslaving the Jews, right? So while there were people who argued, or at least pleaded with Pharaoh, right? There were people who pleaded with Pharaoh to let the slaves go. At some points, they pleaded with Pharaoh and said, Pharaoh, please, the Jews' gods, he's destroying us. While, yes, there were people who pleaded with that, the vast majority didn't, and which is why, actually, in this case, of course, Pharaoh's word overpowered them. But there were also a lot of people who agreed with Pharaoh. Okay? A lot of the Egyptians agreed. So Charlie Kirk is only using half the argument, which he himself wouldn't have endorsed. In other words, if Mr. Charlie was living during the time, of the 60s, he wouldn't have been the one fighting for the civil rights. He would have been one of the ones saying, let the Negroes go. He would have been on the other side. So it's very disingenuous of him to say, to invoke Martin Luther King, to invoke all of the abolitionists, which he wouldn't have been a part of. Okay, so that's where the deception coming in, that he's using that side of the argument, which he himself wouldn't have endorsed. But I'm going to show you the lies, and to kind of bring out then his racist tendencies here. And my biggest criticism is reserved for Jack Hibbs, Calvary Chapel pastor, who aligned himself and his church with this. Let me go back, and I'm just going to go back to clip number 2, and I'm going to show you one of the first things that is wrong with this.
And the arsonists that try to say this bitter lie. They say, well, America was founded on slavery. And if I may, Jack, go into this.
You're quoting now, who is that?
Nicole Hannah Jones.
Yes.
She has a very perplexing
I just want to make
aesthetic.
sure we give credit.
She has red hair. I just don't quite. Yeah, sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, I wanted to say that this is Hannah Nicole, and we'll get to her later with the 1619 Project. But if you notice, the very first thing that Mr. Charlie said, he attacked her looks, right? Now, this is what white racists did. This is what slave owners did. And you have to understand the mentality of why they do this. By attacking Hannah Nicole's looks, her appearance, by attacking her appearance, in the minds of then the congregants of Jack Hibbs, Calvary Chapel Chino, you disassociate yourself. This is an animal. This is inhuman. This is why he felt at home to be able to say she's less than human. That's why he made the point of saying that, hey, guess what? She had a perplexing aesthetics. Now, very smart, very shrewd, because if you just say she's ugly, if you just say like the slave owners did, that Africans look like monkeys, Africans look like they're ugly, right? They're inferior. But yet at the same time, let me just do this sidebar here. Why is it then that you're not criticizing all of these white men that love black women? We'll get to that in a moment. We're going to get back to that in a moment, because his hero, remember, loved black women. They slept with black women. But the idea is to condition the mind that what we're dealing with here is not equal to us. And shame on Jack Hibbs for perpetuating this. Shame on him. Now let's go to clip 3.
I give credit where credit is due. When complete rubbish gets spewed from the paper of record, I want to make sure I get it right, unlike them, because they don't get it right. So Nicole Hannah Jones, she is on a pathological campaign to make sure your kids hate America. And so Nicole Hannah Jones, red hair, see her on TV, always talking about how awful white people are and how awful our country is. She's a bitter racist. I actually call her racist because I think racism is hatred of anyone of any skin color at any time. I think it is sinful and hateful and awful, and it is a sin.
Okay, so a couple of things he said here that I want to unpack. And then again, we're going to keep on because this is important here. First, he says that now Hannah Nicole teaches, and this is the lie, right? So this is the lie. And here's my point. Anytime you have to lie to bolster your position, you're a liar, besides being a racist. But this is what he said. He said that she teaches your children to hate America. Now, remember I said America said that Martin Luther King was the most dangerous man in America? Now, why use that kind of language? See, to a racist, an evil racist, the worst white person is better than any good black person. Because the same people who said that Martin Luther King was the most dangerous man, the same people who said Martin Luther King was the most dangerous man in America, never once criticized white racism, the brutality of Jim Crow, which they live. And here is Charlie Kirk, who now is saying that she is vile. She teaches your children to hate America. First of all, it's a lie, because why wouldn't he cite? And he knows this, by the way. He's a professional. He makes his money, right? He's paid to be on this Christian church platform. So he sits up and he says, she teaches the children to hate America. That's the lie to condition people, right? Besides, he talks about her looks. Now he's going to be outright lying. He says he teaches how awful white people are. Not one statement could he ever produce where Hannah Nicole said that. And he says that to say, well, the mere fact that she could say that white people did evil, did they not? The brutality of Jim Crow. In other words, is he saying that the evil actions of white America are not as evil, are not as bad? All right, let's go to clip 3. Clip 4.
Okay. So she says that our country was founded in 1619, the first year that slaves came to our country. This is not correct. It's not. So
now, we have to talk about now Hannah Nicole and what he's saying right here. Well, what's the 1619 project is what he's taking aim at, in which white evangelicals, white conservatives lost their minds over. The 1619 project, which Hannah Nicole, this was her project, and she brought together several other journalists who put together essays on, and this is what she said right here. She said, and this is what he takes aim at, and I'll here's the thing. Let me read first, and then I'll come back. This is what she said, out of her own words. In August of 1619, a ship appeared on the horizon near Point Comfort, a coastal port in the English colony of Virginia. It carried more than 20 enslaved Africans who were sold to colonists. No aspect of the country that would be formed here has been untouched by the years of slavery that followed. On the 400th anniversary of this fateful moment, it is finally time to tell our true story. Now, this is basically why she did the 1619 project, right there. It came out in 2019, 400 years after the founding of the first slave, or the arrival of the first slaves. All right, here's another statement. Our democracy's founding ideals were false when they were written. Black Americans have fought to make them true. This is what made them go nuts. We'll get to that in a moment. Here's another statement. And this was by Matthew Desmond. He says, if one of the contributors excuse me, one of the contributors to the 1619 Project. Remember, the 1619 Project is a collection of essays done. But I'll get to the controversy in a moment. That if you want to understand the brutality of American capitalism, you have to start with the plantation. Now, part of the losing their minds, okay, was that to say that to say that incensed them. Here's one thing. What Hannah Nicole basically said was, and this is if you want to criticize, was it a mistake? Because then you're talking about phrasing. That the founding of our nations, there were a couple of things, but the two most controversial things that you would hear most is that Hannah Nicole said that the founding of the nation was in 1619 as opposed to 1776. And then that in 1776, that one of the real reasons that they fought the American Revolution was to keep slavery. Those are the two most controversial statements that people have issues with. That's what you're going to hear the most. Now, there are other people that can say, hey, I have some troubles with that. There were people, even liberal, who criticized the project. But here is the thing here. And then Hannah Nicole has since addressed some of those issues. But she never actually said that the founding of the nation was in 1619. What she basically said was, if you want to start thinking about the history in its founding, you have to also look at 1619. So just like if I mentioned the term 1492, what if you've been taught anything about 1492, automatically what comes to mind is that it is when Christopher Columbus discovered America. Now, since then, that has been even challenged. However, it still remains one of the most accepted dates of when the Americas was discovered. Okay. So when we say 1619, that's the context in which she is framing, not the founding. In other words, she didn't say that in 1619, 20 slaves arrived and then people said, this is now America. However, what she did say to 1619, because you realize that most people don't even realize that 1619 even exists. And her point was, we need to bring 1619 to the consciousness of America. There are some white Americans that do not want to do that, and they've always changed history. They've always changed history. In recent times, remember, we didn't even know that the founding fathers owned slaves. More on that later. The other thing was about 1776, when she said that some of the slaves, in the Revolution was fought to keep slaves. And again, if you wanted to have a clear thing of criticism, yes, I'm going to say that it should have been more defined. And I look at this like when people say defund the police. Okay, now when that phrase defund the police came out, I understood what they were saying, but I certainly disagreed with the phrasing, because anytime you have to constantly explain what you really mean, that means it was bad. But of course, defunding the police certainly is applicable, because think about this: when you have police departments who was given federal money, federal equipment, arsenals that look like war, like they were going to war with citizens. That's what they mean by funding the police. If you want to look at defund the police, I'm sorry, not fund, but defund the police. If you want to talk about the literally billions of dollars paid by police departments over the years for unlawful, unjust shootings and murders, you could say that's defund that. Okay. Criticism. When she said that some of the colonists fought to keep their slaves, well, that's again kind of a half true or partial truth, in that were there a few people that fought in order to keep their slavery? Yes. In other words, they come to the land, they enjoy this land, they didn't want England taking it away, and they didn't, and the fear of slavery being taken away certainly is part of it. but was it the essential part of them fighting? And this is where their message got messed up. And to that, I will say, I will blame Hannah Nicole for, again, the presentation of that. But make no mistake about it, that is not what they are disputing too much. They just only using those points because the 1619 project brought awareness to a lot of the truths that Hannah Nicole brought up. Now, we're going to continue this in part 3, where we're going to continue unpacking Charlie Kirk's lies, apostle to white evangelicals. All right, guys, I'll see you next time. Oh, let me say this. Before I leave. Don't forget to like and share this video and subscribe to VP The Bible Perspective. And as always, if you have a thought or comment, add it to the comments section below. Love to hear your comments. All comments are welcome. Till next time, I'll see you then.